Hola gente, seguidoras, seguidores del grupo Grite. Como siempre, un invitado de lujo, hoy de súper lujo, porque es guionista, director, novelista, cuentista, podcaster y conoce la historia del cine de terror de Estados Unidos como pocos académicos la conocen, porque la conoce adentro y la conoce porque lo ha estudiado. Hoy tenemos el inmenso, increíble honor de contar como invitado a Mick Garris. Welcome.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. Estoy feliz para ser aquí.
Ah, muy bien. All
Don't
right.
expect any more Spanish.
Ah,
Eso es todo. That's it all.
that is all. It's okay. Well, would you like guys to start with the questions? Emiliano?
Yes, gracias Pablo, muchas gracias. Bien, Mick Garris comienza su carrera como realizador, como
You froze for me.
You
Did you?
froze, Emiliano. Eh,
Yes.
hago yo la pregunta de
Uh,
Emiliano mientras él
dale,
espera. Bueno,
dale.
while Emiliano defroze.
Okay, he's unfrozen now.
A ver, Emiliano,
Now,
¿quieres hacer la voz?
sí, ¿se me escucha bien
correct.
ahora?
Sí, sí, te escucha bien.
Sí, dale.
Bien, decía que Mick comenzó su carrera realizando making of de películas de género, pero su salto como realizador se va a dar cuando escribe y dirige un capítulo en 1986 para la serie de TV producida por Steven Spielberg, Amazing Stories, un capítulo titulado Life on Death Row. Es un capítulo sobre un condenado a muerte que tras recibir un rayo durante un intento de fuga obtiene poderes milagrosos. Me gustaría saber cómo llega Mick a esa serie y cómo fue el contacto, por supuesto, con Spielberg.
All right. Regarding amazing stories, in 1986, you wrote and direct Life on Death Row, one of the chapters of the TV series, a compelling piece concerning a condemned man who gains miraculous powers following a lightning strike. We would like to ask, how did you first become involved with the series, and what was your impression of working alongside Steven Spielberg?
Well, the luckiest thing in the world that any filmmaker can have is the opportunity to work with Steven Spielberg. And at the time, he was at the height of his powers, as he has been ever since. I was doing specialized publicity and making of documentaries on various movies from The Fog to The Thing, and doing publicity. And that was kind of my film school, was being on the set for The Goonies and Gremlins and doing those documentaries. While we were on location in Astoria, Oregon, on the first day of shooting The Goonies, I was interviewing Spielberg for the Goonies documentary. And he said, "Oh, you must do a lot of these." I said, something you should never say to Steven Spielberg was, "I'm actually trying to make a go of it as a screenwriter." But the timing and everything was right. Steven said to me, "Oh, really? We're looking for writers for our new series, Amazing Stories I'm creating." And so while we were up north in Oregon shooting on the Goonies, I had an agent who had submitted a script of mine to the readers at Amazing Stories, the producers. They had read one of my scripts and written a report on it. And the last line of that report was, "Hire this man." So Stephen read the report, read the script, and called me up. And years later, I found out I was the first writer hired to write for Amazing Stories. And it was eventually turned into an episode directed by Matthew Robbins. and Brad Bird and he co-wrote it. So that was how Amazing Stories started. Then Stephen asked me if I would go on staff and be the story editor full time. So it was my own amazing story, and it began a life of imagination and joy and working with my gods, you know.
Yeah, that's the real big entrance.
Yes.
Okay, next question, Emmy.
Sí, durante sus primeros años, luego de esta participación en esta querida serie, Mick participó de sagas de terror, de entregas, secuelas de sagas de terror muy conocidas y queridas por el público, como las de Nightmare on Elm Street, Psicosis, Critters, aunque podríamos llamarlo sus años formativos como realizador. Quisiera preguntarle a Mick qué elementos de su estilo propio podría decir que pudo incorporar en esas películas, en esas sagas.
Okay, talking about your formative franchise work in Amazing Stories, during this time you have contributed to several of the most cherished horror franchises, including Nightmare on Elm Street, Psycho, and Critters, among others. Although
and The Fly.
yes, and The Fly, yes, indeed. Sorry.
La Mosca.
The Fly, yeah.
Yeah. Although these were formative years,
yes.
Which elements of your distinctive personal style do you feel you managed to infuse into these films?
Well, I would like to think that all of them were different because I made them. I think I have a very dark sense of humor. A lot of the work I did in my early days with Spielberg in particular was very family oriented. But then I started working with Stephen King and doing work on my own ideas. Even on Amazing Stories, there was an episode called The Amazing Fallsworth, which was a very dark, very scary episode. So I like the dark shit, but I also have a sense of humor about it. And it's a pretty dark and disturbing sense of humor sometimes. Like Psycho 4, the original Psycho has very dark humor with it, as well as Psycho 2 and Psycho 3. And that was a perfect opportunity. I felt when I read that script, I felt I'd be right at home with that. So I like things that are very character oriented, that are surprising, that don't take you where you expect to go. And I like to be able to delve into the characters, more than just a superficial, here's a man, here's a woman. It's a very specific man, a very specific woman. In Psycho 4, Henry Thomas is a very sexually frustrated 16-year-old boy whose mother is very overtly sexual, played by Olivia Hussey, and Henry Thomas played young Norman Bates. And just the complexity of those characters make that disturbing relationship even more disturbing and the horror more horrific. So the more human the characters, the more you can identify with them, even if you don't want to be them, the more involved you are in the storytelling, if that makes sense.
All right.
Right.
Fer, desmuteate.
Mi primera pregunta es un poco larga, así que espero que me tengan paciencia. Uno de los primeros trabajos de Mick Garris fue para The Magical World of Disneyland, que was First Bucket. Realmente es una película preciosa, es hermosa, de verdad es hermosa, pero es bastante bastante diferente a otras películas dentro de la misma serie. Tiene elementos de Disney, claro, por ejemplo, Un amigo invisible, la Invisible Friends, A Coming of Age Story. Sin embargo, hay marcas diferentes que hace que Fast Bucket sea diferente. Para empezar, por ejemplo, todos los adultos dentro de Fast Bucket están ahí para ayudar al niño protagonista. Try to help and pay an ear to al niño adolescente que dice que tiene un amigo invisible. Al contrario, lo que pasa muchas veces en estas películas en donde los adultos no escuchan a los niños. Acá realmente están para ayudarlo. No hay viajes a otros mundos. Lo fantástico está como muy limitado. Es más un trabajo psicológico sobre cómo un niño tiene que abandonar a un amigo invisible. Entonces mi pregunta es, ¿cómo llegó a Fast Bucket? ¿Cómo lo concibió?
So how did I come up with Fuzz Bucket?
Yes.
Yes.
You know, it was my first opportunity to direct. I was meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the head of Disney Studios at the time. And because I was writing for Steven Spielberg, all of the studios suddenly, the people who would never hire me or read my scripts were offering me jobs. And so I was meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and they were interested in me signing an overall contract with them exclusive to Disney as a screenwriter. And I wanted to be able to take jobs at different studios. But Jeffrey saw John Landis walking down the hall outside the office, and John and I have been good friends since the 70s. So Jeffrey ran out, talked to Landis, came back in and said, if John Landis executive produces, would you want to direct an episode of the Disney Sunday movie? So I had not directed professionally before. It was the first green light. You know, often you get an opportunity to maybe direct something if it happens. This was definitely going to happen, and it was a green light. And so it was an original story. I came up for Amazing Stories, and Spielberg didn't like it. So being very honest with you here. But I thought it still had value. And so I wrote it for Disney. They loved it. It still plays on the Disney. You can see it on Disney Channel now, Disney Plus. But it is out there. Don't bother to watch it, but it's there. But it was a little more adult oriented in that there's a scene where the little boy hears his parents fighting on the other side of the wall. And it's really disturbing, and you understand why he might want to go into a world of an imaginary friend who turns out to not be imaginary. But they made me change that fight on the other side of the wall to his parents saying, oh, honey, I'm worried about Mikey. He's worrying me. I hope he's okay, rather than the fighting that I had when my parents were on the other side of the wall. So it became, I knew I was making a Disney movie going in, just like with Hocus Pocus, and was family oriented. But I also wanted to express some themes that were important to me from my memories of being 12 years old and what a complicated time that was.
Disney never, excuse me, Pablo, Disney never makes problems with Fast Bucket in being a film a little too much serious, too much adult, and in the sense that adults never are always here to help the kid.
It was not a problem for them. The ratings were very good. And like I say, you can still see it on Disney Plus, and not all of the Disney TV movies are out there.
Yeah,
I kind of wish it weren't out there, but it's a little embarrassing as a first time go. But no, they didn't give me much trouble other than what I just talked about. On in the case of Hocus Pocus, there was a little more trouble. You know, I wrote it as 12-year-olds, and they wanted to make it 16-year-olds, because when you're 12, Halloween is really important. And it's at a very physically important life change. You're hitting puberty, all of those things. If you're 16 years old, you're stealing the candy of the 12-year-olds on Halloween instead. So, but obviously they made the right choice. Hocus Pocus has gone down in history as being a huge, huge success. Although when it came out, it did not do well. It took years for it to become popular.
Emi.
Sí. Mick es reconocido por adaptar la obra de Stephen King en múltiples ocasiones. Pensamos en The Shining, The Stand, Desperation. Pero en 1992 trabajó sobre un guión original del propio Stephen, Sleepwalkers. Lo que yo quería saber, mi pregunta es cómo fue ese trabajo en conjunto, a partir de no una novela o un short story, sino de un guión original, y si difirió de las otras películas en las cuales justamente toma algo ya escrito previamente.
Okay.
Okay, I know it did not come from short stories or books. It was an original screenplay. I know that was part of what you had to say. Yeah. And working with Stephen King, it was my first time. So do you just want me to talk about Sleepwalkers in that regard?
Yes.
Okay. I met with the studio because I had been having some success as a writer, and I directed my first movie, Critters 2, which was a total flop, but at least it showed I could make a movie. And Stephen King had director approval. So they sent him several movies, including Psycho 4. And he really liked Psycho 4. But he chose another director. The studio chose another director, which he approved. And the other director started to change it and make it his own story and created a planet of sleepwalkers and all this. Now, if you're Columbia Pictures and you have a Stephen King movie, you want to call it Stephen King's Sleepwalkers, not other directors' Sleepwalkers. So they fired that director. They called me up and asked me to come in and take over. And I had no idea that was happening. I thought we were just going to have a lunch meeting. And at that lunch meeting, one of the studio producers gave me the key to my office, and I moved in that day. So, but it was very much a Stephen King experience. He wasn't involved on the set except the one day he came out for 2 hours to do his cameo with Toby Hooper and Clive Barker. But otherwise, we would talk on the phone a lot. And when the studio had notes, I would tell him about them. And either he would write the changes, or I would write the changes, or I'd ask him about an idea I would have, and then he would write that. So it was a great, great, great experience. And we got close on that, and it led to him offering me The Stand.
Y perdón, Pablo, esa comunicación con Steven, ¿se pudo extender en tus siguientes adaptaciones de su obra?
This
the connection that we had
relationship with Stephen King, with that you have in this particular movie, stay in the time for the next collaborations in the same way?
Absolutely. We came from the same place. He's a few years older than I am, but we still both watched a lot of the same TV shows, The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits. We read the same comic books. He was old enough to read the EC comics. I was not. I read them in reprints. But we were raised, neither of us our families had no money at all. Our parents split up at an early age. We were raised by single mothers. And we had a lot of similarities in our background that led to a lot of similarities in our tastes in popular culture. And the fact that I'm also an author and have written books as well as screenplays, I think I understand what a writer is looking for in a translation to another medium. And I think we just connected in a way that is very rare for an author of books and a director and screenwriter of films. Now, the good news is that Sleepwalkers and The Stand and The Shining, he wrote the screenplays himself for those. And I have a lot of respect for his work. And I want the audience to love what I do, but first and foremost, I want Stephen King to love what I do because it's very, very personal for him. You know, he hated the Kubrick Shining because it wasn't about what the book was about. And the book, when we did the miniseries, it's about the deterioration of a man because of alcohol and his sense of responsibility for harming his young son at an early age. You know, it's very emotionally complex, and a lot of that complexity was not reflected in the Kubrick film. So
Yes.
when we got the opportunity to do that, I needed to show King the respect that he deserved and that his book deserved. So we get along in that way very, very well.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Con respecto a Sleepwalkers, Sleepwalkers is a horror movie made in 1992 when Hollywood was basically making not more horror films, at least not in theaters.
Yeah.
Horror films were basically dead. If you want to see a horror movie, you must go to see Batman, Tim Burton's Batman, Steven
Right.
Spielberg's Jurassic Park. There was no horror in theaters. What happened in the first half of the 90s in America? Why
Well,
horror film was dead?
Well, it always goes in cycles. You know, you have a run of successful horror movies, you're going to get more of them. And then the first one that doesn't do well, they're going to say, oh, it's over. Nobody wants to see horror movies anymore. But horror movies are inexpensive to make. They don't rely on having movie stars. The filmmaker and the film itself, the story and the scares, that's the star of the movie. If you get good actors in it, that's great. They don't have to be famous actors to be great actors. So obviously, a movie like Sleepwalkers, that cost $15 million to make. I guarantee you that was the lowest budget of any Columbia picture of that year. That year, Columbia Pictures, at the same time we were shooting Sleepwalkers on the lot, Steven Spielberg was shooting Hook and Francis Coppola was shooting Dracula. So it was Stephen, Francis, and Mick. But, you know, those movies cost at least $50-60 million each. And Sleepwalkers, you know, if it worked, they'd make a lot of money, and they did. If it didn't work, they wouldn't notice. So they had Stephen King's name on it. That helped because Stephen King was the movie star rather than any of the actors. So.
How the film was received by critics?
Oh, critics hated it. You know, and the worst is always my hometown critic. You know, I was born in Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Times has never given me a good review. And it's so painful because it's all of your friends and family and everybody. It's like, let's see what the LA Times has to say about Sleepwalkers. Garbage, you know, just really embarrassing. Even The Stand and The Shining, which got only good reviews everywhere else, the LA Times didn't like them. So it's like, fuck.
Nobody is prophet in his own line.
That's right. That's right. There was a very good line that
Yeah.
one reviewer for Psycho 4 had. Oh dear, the gardeners are going outside. I hope you don't hear that. But
Yeah.
he had one good line about Psycho 4. He said, Director Garris is to Hitchcock what Peoria is to Paris. And it's
Ah,
ouch, but really funny.
yes, absolutely. All right, guys, next question.
There is a philosopher called Marc Augé que trabaja mucho el tema de los no lugares. ¿Qué son los no lugares para Marc Augé? Básicamente lugares en donde la gente tiene que reafirmar su identidad todo el tiempo. Entre ellos, carreteras y hoteles. En la ficción, en la literatura de Mick Garris y en su cine, quizás más en la literatura, él trabaja muchísimo con la idea de carreteras, horror taking places in rows and hoteles. ¿Por qué este interés en los no lugares?
Well, I love, you're talking about my books more than the films, right? Although we did it in desperation as well. But I love the neo-noir subgenre, but especially desert noir, where
Oh,
it's called noir, which means black, but it's out in the bright sun and in the sand. And my novel Salome, I think you may be referring to, a lot of that takes place in the desert. A screenwriter's actress wife is horribly murdered in a seedy motel right across the border in Arizona. And I just, as someone who was born in Los Angeles, in Southern California, I have always romanticized the desert. The desert is so cinematic, even if you're writing it rather than shooting it. It's just this endlessness of heat and dryness. It is oppressive and yet beautiful at the same time. When my parents were divorcing, I lived with my grandmother in Palm Springs, which was a desert town 100 or so miles from Los Angeles. And it may only be 100 miles away, but it feels like the surface of the moon. And there's something incredibly romantic and cinematic and easy to put it in your mind's eye, especially when you have evil taking place in the sun rather than in the dark. It takes more ability to pull that off. But if you can, you can do something surprising and effective and multi-layered.
Your episode for Tales from the Crypt, you can see it as a noir.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, when I agreed to do it, I said, let's set it in the 1950s and make it a noir, although it's much more comedic. But, let's set it in the offices of Tales from the Crypt. And these are people working on the comic book of Tales from the Crypt. And then I cast comedians in the main roles. And I switched the part. The main part of the woman was played by a man, and the main part that was written for a man was played by a woman, Rita Rudner and Richard Lewis. And they're stand-up comedians. Well, Richard is no longer with us, but and it was very noir. I love noir. And there's an exaggerated sense of cinema. In my episode, Life on Death Row, also on Amazing Stories, I shot it in color, but black and white in the art direction. There are no bright colors. Everything looks very gray or black or white. There's no primary colors. There's no blue. There's nothing to tell you that it's a color film, but I wouldn't have been able to shoot it in black and white, although I wrote an episode that they did shoot in black and white called No Day at the Beach. But it's a visual style that is entirely cinematic. A lot of movies can easily be translated from a book. If it's a drama or a comedy or whatever, you don't have to put a lot of style into it. But in noir, part of what the movie is, a character in the movie, is the cinematography and the lighting and the shadows, all of those things that you can only do in film that you can't do in any other medium.
Your short story, your horror short story, perdón, Pablo, yo te dejo, perdón. Your horror short story, Free, is basically a horror noir with a road and a woman at the road.
I'm so glad you read that. That's one of my favorite things I've written. And
it's beautiful. That short story is incredible.
Oh, thank you. It really, that was the last novella that I've written. I've only written screen material since then, and I'm ready to write another one. But yeah, and also writing it in the first person as a woman rather than as a heterosexual man, which I am, but trying to wear the body and mind and soul of a woman as I'm writing this in the first person. It was a challenge, but one that felt very comfortable, trying to see what it's like through the eyes of another gender and understand how oppressive a marriage can be, and children that are really unbearable to be around. Just when you start your life as an artist and end your life as a parent, it's like you run into this dead end, and it's a life of frustration, and to escape from that. I'm just so glad you read that, Fernando. It's
do you find too hard to broad from the female perspective?
No, I don't know what that says, but no, it was easy, because that's the job of a writer anyway, is to become every character that you write and find those pieces of you that exist in those characters, and to take on that role. That's our job. And our job as writers is also to be brave and not to be afraid of entering a place that would normally give you fear.
Pablo, ¿querías preguntar algo?
No. It's okay. I just had Sigmund Freud say that in the dreams, all the characters are the dreamer.
That's true.
When you are a writer, you, in some kind, according to my humble point of view, of course, you have to empty yourself to get in all your characters, and at the same time you are all of them, but none of them.
Yeah,
so
I agree. Yeah.
You finally, when you put the end, you need a session with your
with your therapist.
Yes, your facility next home, because you're gonna be out of your mind.
Yeah, you have to put your ego aside and take on all of the people. Yeah.
Yes, I used to say to my pupils, in a way of saying that the first thing when you write is you have to put away your ego. Is the only thing that grants you that you can make a good story. Not a good story that everybody likes, but the story itself is a story that can be sustained. Anyway,
I agree.
People like or not, or doesn't, but this is the thing. Going back to Mr. Freud. Sorry for the intermission.
No, that was good.
Okay, guys.
Pasemos a, si está bien, a Psycho. Mike filmó
Yes.
la última entrada dentro de la saga Psycho con Anthony Perkins, una película muy buena. Igualmente toda la saga
Oh,
de Psycho está
gracias.
buena, conserva una buena calidad. Psycho 4 es a very good movie en donde las mejores escenas son las que transcurren en la radio entre la conversación entre el personaje Norman, interpretado por Anthony Perkins, y la gente que está en la radio. No sé cómo preguntar esto sin arruinar el final de la película para los que no lo vieron. Hay un final, a happy ending. My question is,
Yeah.
no spoilers, no spoilers.
Well, there's a baby. It's okay.
Um, the end was always the same end, or do you, in some moments, have doubts about how to end? It was wrote
Well,
by Joseph Stefano.
yeah.
How to end Psycho 4.
I was lucky because I didn't have to write it, but Joe Stefano, who had written the original Psycho, did write the script. And the script that I got was the script that we shot. I made a few changes. Joe was older, and there were some things that needed to be modernized a little bit. And there were some pieces to the relationship that were nice and twisted that I wanted more twisted. Um, I say it's the first part of my motherfucker trilogy between Psycho 4 and Sleepwalkers, and I haven't made the third part yet, so I don't know if I ever will. But um, just there's twisted passion, and it's a family film, but for the Manson family. Um, it's a very it was great to have the original writer on, and it was great to have the original cast with Anthony Perkins involved as well. And my assistant or my producer was Alfred Hitchcock's assistant director on the original film, Hilton Green. So I was able to reach out to the people who were there when it originally happened. And I wanted to do something just like I want to make Stephen King proud of what we do together. I wanted to make the ghost of Alfred Hitchcock proud of what we did together. And the ending was always there. I don't know if the cry of the baby was always there or if that was something that came later. Um, because Norman and his wife, who was a psychiatric nurse, um, they get together and they stay together through the crises that I won't spoil for you. But it all ends relatively happily. Only a handful of people were killed by Norman, but he and his wife end up together as the Psycho house is burned down. Um, and then at the very end, after we close the doors of the house and it goes to black, there's the sound of a crying baby. And you assume that there's another chapter to come in the story of Norman Bates. Thankfully, there was not. But it was just a nice coda. The idea that what would Norman Bates's child be like is a nice question to put as a button for the end of the movie.
How was to work with Anthony Perkins?
Complicated. You know, Tony had directed Psycho 3 and
Yes.
he wanted to direct Psycho 4. But Psycho 3, the critics hated it and it didn't make any money. So they didn't want him to direct it. And I'm this young guy whose only movie at this time was Critters 2. So we had a lunch together. We went over the script page by page and all that. We hit it off very well. But he was constantly testing me because he knew that he should have directed it. He knew more about Norman Bates than I knew, but I would occasionally give him direction very cautiously and gently. You learn how to direct every actor individually when you work with them in different ways. You're also part psychologist. But he would test me to make sure that I was not just setting up pretty shots, but doing something that would amplify the drama of every scene and the pace of the movie. So he would stop. There was one particularly well-known part that I talk about a lot where he gets angry and he was going to slam a butcher knife into the butcher block in the kitchen table when he's on the phone on the talk radio program with CCH Pounder. So we're just setting up to shoot the scene. And he said, now, Mick, this knife, don't you think it's old and stupid? It's been done and over, you know, it was in the script all the time. But in front of the 60 crew members who were waiting to set up the shot and set up the scene. And so I basically just had to say, Tony, why don't you and I walk over here, come up with the solution together, and let the crew do their job? Because we were literally standing there for 45 minutes talking about it. And it was not a big budget movie. It did not have a long schedule, but we did it. We walked to the side. I don't know which of us came up with it, but instead of taking a butcher knife into the block, he gets so upset that he twists an apple in half. And it's a really nice little piece of business that you've never seen before. And it made everybody happy. And we were able to shoot it on schedule. But he would constantly test me in those ways because he wanted to know that I was a filmmaker that was a storyteller, not a filmmaker that was a very modern kind of what a bunch of cool shots and tributes to other movies. So in the end, we screened it for him alone in the Hitchcock Theater at Universal Studios. And he just went on and on about how it was so good and so much better than his and the best of the sequels and on to the point where I was embarrassed and said, Tony, I really appreciate it, but please stop. But it turned out well. Everybody was happy, but there was a little bit of a struggle getting there, but it was worth it.
What is your personal opinion of Psycho 3?
I like it. It's twisted. It's dark. I think it spends a little too much time just being twisted rather than telling the story so much. But I like it a lot. My favorite in order is Psycho 1, Psycho 2, and then Psycho 3, which is good because that's the order they came out. So,
Emiliano.
Sí, gracias, Fer. Bien, Mick es considerado como realizador un referente, un ícono del género terror, pero lo cierto es que trabajó consistentemente también los otros géneros fantásticos, particularmente la fantasía. Previamente había comentado un poco sobre Hocus Pocus, que acá conocemos como Abracadabra, Lost in Oz, The Witches of East End, algunos capítulos. Pero yo quiero preguntarle sobre una serie de fantasía que es una de mis favoritas del siglo XXI. Mick ingresa al universo de los cuentos de hadas con Once Upon a Time, dirigiendo 2 episodios. Aunque, bueno, ya había trabajado con la fantasía en años anteriores, mi pregunta es cómo fue esa experiencia de adoptar relatos o tomar personajes tradicionales o provenientes de los cuentos de hadas y llevarlo a la pantalla chica y en la actualidad contemporánea.
Yes. Emiliano is referring to Fairy Tales and Once Upon a Time, where you revisited the realm of fairy tales,
yes,
by directing episodes of Once Upon a Time, year after writing Hocus Pocus, that in our country was new as Abracadabra. Emmy would like to know what was the particularly challenges of adapting such traditional characters for a modern television audience.
Well, it was really interesting. I had always resisted doing episodic television. I loved movies. I loved miniseries and made-for-TV movies and all that. I never really watched series. Now series are much better than movies these days. But at
Yeah.
that time, I resisted it. And then I did my first episode. I did a Once Upon a Time, and I thought, this is really fun. You have all of the new technology. We did a lot of scenes shot completely blue screen. Nothing was in the scene except the actors and a blue screen, and all of the backgrounds were put in post-production. And I'd never worked in that before. There's a scene in my first episode of Once Upon a Time where one of the characters ages and dies. And the dying scene is the most emotional scene I've ever directed in my life. And it was for this Disney TV show. And it turned out so well. And I learned a lot from that scene and how to shoot it and not have actors kind of wear themselves out, because there were a lot of tears. You have to be careful how many takes you can do, how many setups you can do, how many angles you can shoot, which direction should you shoot first, which character, which actor can hold out the longest. But it was so emotional, and it has become one of the favorite episodes over the 7 seasons. So I did 2 of those, and it was very different. I worked with a lot of young actors I wasn't familiar with. And the experience itself, the producer is in charge rather than the director. But they gave me a lot of creative input because I have a lot of credits. And so they trusted me, and they liked the first one I did a lot. So they asked me to do another one. And then there was a spin-off show called Ravenswood that they asked me to do a couple of those, a spin-off of Pretty Little Liars, after I did an episode of Pretty Little Liars. And then I did Ravenswood, and I was able to do things that I had not been able to do in my career before. You're on a very tight schedule. You come in, you shoot your scene, you shoot your episode, you cut your episode, and then it's goodbye. I'm done. I don't have to worry about it for months afterwards. It's somebody else's responsibility. You do the best work you can, work that you can be proud of, and then you move on to the next one. So I found it challenging in really good ways and educational. Now, there were a couple of TV episodes that I did not have that much fun with doing, but I loved Pretty Little Liars. I loved Once Upon a Time. I loved Ravenswood. Witches of East End, I had a little bit of trouble with a couple of the producers. And Shadowhunters was okay during the shoot, but post-production, not so much fun. But, not everything is going to be a party. But all of it was worth doing, and all of it was an education, and all of it, I hope, made me a better filmmaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Emiliano.
Sí. Mick durante años llevó adelante Post Mortem, un podcast en el que entrevistó a un sinnúmero de referentes del terror. Lo rico, lo interesante de este podcast es que las entrevistas van desde grandes nombres hasta nombres que recién empiezan, que son muy poco conocidos, pero eso es lo interesante, ¿no? Crear un cuerpo de trabajo inclusivo. Mi pregunta es si podría Mick comentar cuál es para él el valor de un material como este en relación a la creación de un archivo del género, un archivo de conocimiento del género terror.
Amy is referring to your podcast, Post Mortem Archive, and that you hosted for several years, interviewing a vast array of horror luminaries and not so quite well-known new people arriving to the genre.
Anybody I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you view the significance of this work in terms of preserving such a is historical archive of the genre?
Well, I've been interviewing since I was a teenager. We talked about doing journalism, and I interviewed Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and people like that. So I've always been curious. I've always been a questioner. I've always done interviews. Then I did the TV interviews back in way back when. And then I did Post Mortem as a TV show. We did 10 episodes back in 2010. But when the podcast started, the podcast company came to me and wanted to meet with me and asked me if I was interested. And I thought, this is great. I never imagined that it would take forever, that I would do 7 years of it, that we would get everybody who ever did anything important in the horror genre. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but in the first year, I realized we were putting together a library of information for filmmakers in the genre, because every interview we did, and each of them averaged about an hour in length, I heard people, filmmakers, creative people, talking about things I'd never heard them talk about before. And I would like to think it's because, a lot of them were done here in my office in this room. And they're comfortable. They are talking with somebody who is never going to be negative, always talk about their work in a positive light, because I appreciate the work that they did, that I had worked in that field for years as well. And so we could talk about things, we could share experiences within that. They felt so comfortable that it became a conversation rather than an interview. And so they would talk about things that did not come up in more formalized interviews, because we weren't here to promote a new movie. We were here to talk about their careers. And it became something that I wished I'd had as a young filmmaker. We've got, I think, 180 interviews. I think there's 280 episodes, counting the Ask Mick Anything episodes. But the interviews, I think there's like 175, 180 interviews with people that I learned something from every single one. And to be able to have access to Stephen King and Clive Barker and Whoopi Goldberg and Ben Stiller and all these people who've worked in the genre, it's really valuable. And I love that it's out there and that it's accessible for free to anybody who wants it anytime.
Good. If my colleagues allow me, talking about gathering with the luminaries of the genre, I would like to hear a piece of advice about your celebrated dinners with the whole stardom of the genre directors like Guillermo del Toro, Toby Hooper, whatever.
Well, that's where it started, was at the dinners. And, we would run into each other at Directors Guild meetings or film festivals around the world. And somebody would always say, boy, wouldn't it be great for us to all get together for dinner sometime and tell our horror stories, not the horror stories on the screen, but the horror stories off the screen. So that went on for a few years. And finally, I realized nobody's going to do this. So maybe I should. And it took about a week of making phone calls, but there were a dozen. We had Toby Hooper, John Landis, Wes Craven, Joe Dante, Guillermo del Toro, Stuart Gordon, Larry Cohen. I mean, we had a dozen of the filmmakers there, and everybody had such a good time that the next time, a couple of months later, it took me 1 hour to get everybody to go. And each time we'd have one, people would tell other people, and I'd get phone calls. Can I go to your dinner? And, can I bring my friend, blah, 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 and all that, until it grew to the point where the last dinner that we had, it was the first one after COVID. We'd not had a dinner for 6 years. I'd kind of gotten tired of organizing it and all. And I really missed Toby and Larry and Stuart and all these people that were gone and wouldn't be there. So we put one together last March. There were 43 creatives there. It was our biggest one ever. And it was kind of Masters of Horror 2.0, you know. But it was great. So we'll do another one before long. And now I've started doing them in the UK. I've done 2 of them in the UK, and I'm going there again in July. So I will probably set up our 3rd annual UK Masters of Horror dinner.
Trust me, I would like to be just a little fly.
Una mosca en
Yes,
el pared.
hanging around and to hear the conversations and to learn from such a great uh, people from the genre.
Well, it's very social. It's not like we're talking about the work that we do so much as just if it were a group of shoe salesmen, it would be the same sort of thing. Just getting together, having fun, sharing friendship and in ways, because directors never work together. That's why it's so much fun to get directors to come on your set and do cameo parts, like in Sleepwalkers, having King and Hooper and John Landis and Clive and Joe Dante and all those things. You know, it's a way to share the experience, and it's great. It's fellowship.
Yeah. Next question, guys.
In this sense, we can say you created Master of Horrors because most of the horror TV series, most mixed horror with humor, and there was very little in TV about serious horror, a real horror TV film.
Yeah, I mean, most horror for television was made by people who didn't really care about horror. Tales from the Crypt was an exception, but it became the boobs and blood show. You know, there were always going to be some bare boobs and a lot of blood and a lot of laughing with the Crypt Keeper, which was great. Tales from the Crypt was great. I did one. I had a great time doing it. But the whole point, the philosophy behind Masters of Horror was getting the best people in the genre and telling them, we don't have much money, but whatever you want to make, we will support you. If you can shoot it in 10 days for $2 million, then there is no limit but your imagination, and I will be there to back you up. And that's what we did. And it turned out to be a success. And everybody had a great time doing it. Nobody made much money, but they had total creative freedom. And so we didn't have a host because we didn't want a unifying form. We wanted each filmmaker to make a self-contained movie that expressed their cinematic personality and not try to fit the confines or the style of a show. Every episode, even the titles, were completely different for each episode.
Great.
Volviendo a tu horror fiction. In your horror fiction, you are very acid and vitriolic about Hollywood and about American TV. Very acid. In these times, many of your short stories are recollected in these evil things we do.
Yeah.
In this time, in this circumstance, do you have fear that television could come with a TV show called Dating Daddy? That was something you create for Tyler's third act or Salome. I don't remember.
Oh, Tyler's third act. Yeah.
Tyler's third act.
To cut off
Dating Daddy
his...
was trash. Do you have fear that somebody come with a similar idea for real?
Well, I hope not. But you know, I told you earlier I have a very dark sense of humor. you're getting to know me on this interview, and I'm very mild-mannered, and I'm, very polite, and I'm nice to people and who are nice to me. And this is who I am. This is my demeanor. So what I like to do is take the very worst parts of my personality, multiply them times 1,000, and then write them in the first person. So I write about characters in my fiction that are just completely horrible. Like in Ugly, the character in Ugly is an arrogant plastic surgeon, son of a bitch.
Yes.
And I'm just writing him as if I'm him. And I'm inhabiting this horrible human being and enjoying the hell out of it, because I'm never going to do any of this in real life, and I would hate anyone who would. And I find them despicable.
In
And
Ugly, in Ugly no hay personaje positivo.
no, nothing positive in Ugly. But I also think it's really funny. So, but as far as
Indeed.
my view of the movies and television world, they can be demanding and they can be ridiculous and silly, but it's been my life. I'm not biting the hand that feeds me. I'm teasing the hand that feeds me. I'm having fun I'm playing with the hand that feeds me, because I love the opportunities that I've had over the decades and that I continue to have. Um, I don't know what else I would do if I couldn't write or make movies or publish books. Not that I make a living publishing books, so you know how difficult that is, Pablo.
Yeah.
But, I have fun with it because I like ripping things apart that are really going to be just fine despite whatever I do to them.
Great.
Emiliano.
Sí. Estamos viviendo desde hace ya unos cuantos años lo que se ha llamado, voy a poner comillas, una etapa o edad de oro de la televisión en cuanto a la producción de series, especialmente series de género. Y con el terror está sucediendo, por supuesto, esto mismo. Teniendo en cuenta esto y teniendo en cuenta también la proliferación de streamers hablando de manera independiente, opinando o realizando crítica o lo que sea de terror, mi pregunta o mi consulta a Mick sería: ¿qué piensa del avance del streaming en líneas generales en relación con el género del terror?
Let me say that on the
Basically
rise
talking about horror streaming on
of
streaming, right?
streaming, yes, which is your perspective on the awesome of streaming platforms and the proliferation of independent voices discussing horror within this new digital space.
Well, I think the availability of horror via streaming is fantastic. But how you
Yes.
find the good stuff versus the bad stuff is very difficult. Do you choose it just by a little icon of a picture of a witch or something? Well, let me try that. Do you go to Tubi? Do you go to Disney Plus? Do you go to Netflix? Do you go to Hulu? Hulu in particular has a ton of horror movies you've never heard of before that have been made in the last 5 years that, not all of them are good. Let's just put it that way. But I think streaming is great because of the portability of it, the accessibility of it, and you can watch it whenever you want on your own terms. You don't have to tune in Friday night at 8 o'clock. But how you get the word out is the big challenge. I've not done a streaming show yet. I may be doing one soon. We'll find out. There's stuff in the works, but I haven't had that experience yet. But the creative input, I'm concerned that the success of streamers like Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, other than if you're a huge star, if you're Guillermo del Toro, you can make whatever you want. for Netflix, and they'll put it in theaters and it'll be up for Oscars and things like that. But if you're a journeyman working, a talented creative filmmaker working with one of the streaming studios, their egos have gotten really big. So they have a lot of creative input into what your movie is, how it gets made. And, you know, they say, look, people are also, they're watching their phones at the same time you're watching your movie. So you have to plan making your film around that. And it's, I don't want to take that into consideration when I'm making a film. I'm assuming everybody's attention will be fully on the screen. But people watch 25 minutes and then next day they'll watch another hour of it. And the next day they'll watch. So it's a fragmented experience. I still obviously prefer going to a movie theater, but I think streamers are important and have the capability they've shown of doing fantastic work and letting great talented people do great work that they couldn't have done for theatrical films.
Pablo, me gustaría agregar una pequeña pregunta en relación a esto que está comentando Mick. Quisiera saber si los premios, las premiaciones, the awards, Saturn Awards, the Academy Awards, I don't know, si siguen siendo como era hace unos cuantos años atrás, referencia para encontrar títulos que tal vez sean títulos recomendables o títulos para ir a ver. O si los premios, las premiaciones ya no pueden ser tenidas en cuenta para eso, según su opinión.
Amy, related to that, we were discussing about streaming and this kind of movies in the basement that nobody knows. I would like to know that if some of them awarded with some prize or some award.
You mean like those?
Yeah, if you can
Yeah,
follow.
I think the science fiction, the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films has the Saturn Awards.
Yeah,
Fangoria has the Chainsaw Awards. Rue Morgue has their awards, the magazines in the genre. I think those help a lot. And there are international film festivals all around the world. And I've been to a lot of them, including in Buenos Aires.
yes,
And that's where I discover movies I've never heard of. And it's one of the reasons I go. And they don't have Western film festivals. They don't have drama film festivals or romantic comedy film festivals, but they have horror film festivals all around the world because that's a genre that engenders passion. You know, it feels personal. Horror fans want to own their movies. They want to feel possessive of them. They want them on physical media, not just to stream them. They want the permanence of them on their shelves. But I think festivals and awards are really important in helping to spread the word about movies that people might otherwise not know about. Like a Spanish language film, The Coffee Table. Have you seen that?
Yes.
yeah,
Fucking amazing.
yes.
I love that film. And I met the director, Calle Casas, and we became friends. I met him in Sitges in Spain.
Mhm.
And I gave it to Stephen King to watch. And Stephen King was blown away by it. And he posted on Twitter. And
Exactly.
now Calle is getting offers to do other movies. And he was making his living selling collectible toys, you know?
Mhm.
And he made this amazing movie that it's easy to lose friends by recommending it to the wrong people.
Okay, next question, guys.
Voy a improvisar una, Pablo.
Yeah.
Mick mentioned that your visions of films now is fragmentary. There is something positive about this new form of seeing films in cell phones, in fragmentary ways, cutting the film, going to the fridge, returning. There is something good about this.
Not to me, unless it's an anthology. You know, like Nightmare Cinema had 5 stories in it. If you want to watch one of those stories and then set it down until tomorrow, then I'm fine with that. But, and you know, one of the mini series, if you want to watch a 90-minute episode and then another one later, that's what it was made for. But I think filmmakers work really hard to create a pace that a movie has, to build and release momentum and tension. And a genre film in particular is the worst possible way to watch it that way, because all of that time and hard work and creativity in trying to build that build and release of tension is completely lost when you watch it in fragments.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Emiliano.
Sí, Mick tiene una extensa trayectoria que abarca tanto dirección en cine como, obviamente, para televisión. Quisiera preguntarle qué diferencia se encuentra, de acuerdo a su propia experiencia, entre ambos medios, con respecto, un poco había comentado esto ya previamente, con respecto a las libertades creativas que él pueda tener personalmente.
Amy is referring to creative freedom, and having enjoyed a distinguished career both in cinema and television, he would like to know what distinctions have you observed between the two mediums regarding your own creative autonomy?
Well, film and television have changed a lot since streaming and pay TV have come into the picture. When I was originally working on Stephen King projects doing The Stand and The Shining, I had to make a film that had commercial breaks. So talking about building and releasing tension, you'd have to do it on a regular basis during the course of that 2-hour movie, or 6 or 8 hour movie, do it in pieces. But with streaming, with pay TV channels like HBO and Showtime and Shudder, other of the apps and streaming platforms, movies and television have not got as big a distinction, although movies have become more about events. They're Marvel, they're theme park rides, they're not movies anymore, with major exceptions. I mean, something like Weapons, something like Guillermo's Frankenstein will get through, but I'm done with Marvel movies. And you know, I don't want to go to the movies just to see the same annoying video game effects on the screen. You know, men wearing tights never were very interesting to me. Superheroes, when I was a kid, I loved the comic books. But look, I'm 74 years old right now. And the last thing I want to see is a couple of superheroes bashing it out on the North Pole, you know.
Emiliano.
So,
sí, ya, continue.
Sí.
Well, just movies have become more of an event rather than storytelling. But I think that's reversing a little bit. And I think that's because of people making movies for the streaming platforms influencing movies rather than the other way around.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Emiliano.
Okay.
Sí,
Amy?
sí. Pablo, tengo una última pregunta. Me gustaría, si me permitís, agregar una última, Pablo. Trataré de hacerla breve. Quiero preguntarle a Mick sobre su última película, que ya tiene unos años, por supuesto. La mencionó hace un momento, Nightmare Cinema.
Cine Pesadilla.
Yeah. Quisiera saber cómo fue trabajar en ese formato episódico, colaborativo, y cómo fue trabajar también con Mickey Rourke.
Okay.
Yeah, my last movie was Nightmare Cinema, which was
Yes.
an anthology film.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Amy would like to know how was to work with Mickey Rourke, that nowadays is not having a good time. And
Well, Mickey Rourke is eccentric, to say the least. But
yeah,
I must say, once things started, I had a great time with him. At first, he was just there. It was a money job. He was just going to work one day. He was paid cash in a paper bag. And, it's like, well, I've heard stories like this, but I've never been in one. And I had to make cue cards for him to be reading and all. But he ended up having a really good time. And I ended up having a really good time with him. He was a handful. He was very eccentric. But when 10 o'clock rolled around, we still had a couple more shots to do. And he said, 10 o'clock, I'm out of here. And that's the last I seen or heard from Mickey Rourke. Even if we had any looping to do in post-production, we would just fake it. I would do it,
Yes,
But
yes.
but I really enjoyed working with him. And Nightmare Cinema is something, it's the lowest budget I've ever worked at, but also something I'm really proud of. I love the group we got together. And I think we made a really, really good movie that doesn't look nearly as cheap as it was. And we made it in town in Los Angeles, which almost never happens anymore. And with some really talented people. It was a great experience.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Meg,
all right.
your last question. Your last question is about what are you reading now in terms of horror, no horror, books, magazines, whatever. What are you reading? What you recommend?
I'm just going back to the novelist Thomas Tryon.
Yes.
Yeah,
He wrote
the
in
other,
the
the
other
other.
and Harvest Home. He was an
Yeah,
actor. He was an actor, and he became a writer
absolutely.
in the 70s, and he became
Yes.
hugely successful as a writer. And I just reread Harvest Home and the other for the first time since the 1970s when I was very young.
Mm.
And so those are the two books I've read most recently. I read a lot of noir. I'm also reading a um, Dashiell Hammett book called The Dane Curse right now. Um, I read contemporary stuff too. I really like um, Josh Mallerman. I really like Grady Hendrix. Um, there are a handful of really wonderful people. And their names are fluttering away right now. But yeah, I love reading. And I know a lot of people who make films don't read books, but I will always be reading books. So it's a
You,
favorite thing
you,
to do.
you know, make genre scholars said that there are three books that change forever the understanding and the place of horror in the general consideration, because all the time horror was uh, um,
The
very
Bastard
dreadful.
Stepchild. Yeah.
Yes, the three books was that in 5 years changed forever and opened the gates for the Stephen Kings and so on. The first one was Rosemary Baby of Ira Levin. The other is the other of Thomas Tryon, and the final, of course, The Exorcist of William Peter Blatty.
Yeah.
The three of them, of course, are successful movies.
Yeah, it was
Changed.
great. What's interesting is you can't find the movie, or the Harvest Home TV miniseries. You can't
No,
find them anywhere. They're not streaming. They're not on physical media. They disappeared. You can get the books easily enough, but not the movies. And I'm dying to see the other again.
Yeah, yeah. And they say that these three books, for the first time, portrayed that the monster wasn't outside. The monster is inside. Not only
Absolutely.
because what was happening for those days in Vietnam and the whole things about segregation and so on, but
Absolutely.
the kind of we discovered that the next door neighbor could be the crazy man with an axe or a chainsaw.
Well, that's the
So
theme of Psycho in 1960 as well.
indeed,
So,
indeed.
Oh,
yeah.
So the other is one of my favorite
It's great.
books
It's
because it's
poetic.
great.
It's
It's poetic, and you know the plot twist is. I remember I read it when I was about 18, no
yeah.
more than 18, 20 years, and I say, bloom, when wherever you think is going to one uh, place, and finally, if you want to see it, they are going to another.
It's got a
The
great
other
twist.
is a great, great, great book of mine. Okay.
Pablo, terminamos entonces con la pregunta de siempre.
Yes, it's customary for us asking our guests. Our last question is if you can share with us, what are you up to?
I've got 3 projects going on now. One of them that looks very likely to happen that I cannot tell you about, but I can promise you you'll be excited about it because I am. I've just adapted my novel Salome to become a movie, and we're going out with it shortly. It's not got a green light yet, but the script is done and I would be directing it. And thirdly, there's another Stephen King project that we might be doing that we're just taking out now to production companies and the like. So we'll see. But all of them are in the land of maybe. So we might be doing 1, 2, 3, or 0 of them. So we'll see
Yes,
what happens.
yes.
That's what usually should happen. Okay, once again, we have no words of thankful to your time, to your open heart, your sharing, your huge experience, and the way you told us so humble, so in a teaching way, like a professor or a scholar. Yes, indeed.
Professor Garris, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
So,
really appreciate your kindness and your generosity and having shared some time with you.
all right, it was a really pleasure
An
and
honor.
an honor, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope to visit Argentina once again.
Yes,
And
please.
Yeah, please.
as you say in your Spanish, my casa is su casa, señor.
Muchas gracias. All right.
Okay.
Thank you,
See
gentlemen.
you around. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you and bye.